Trump's tariff tantrums are backfiring spectacularly, and Jack Daniels just became the poster child for what happens when you mess with America's trading partners.
We have trillions of dollars coming into our country. If we didn't have tariffs, we would be a very poor nation, and we would be taken advantage of by every other nation in the world, friend and foe. We're not going to let that happen. And we have a very, very big case in the Supreme Court. Our country has a chance to be unbelievably rich again, but it can also be unbelievably poor again. If we don't win that case, our country is going to suffer so greatly.
We're talking about a 62% crash in Canadian sales that has corporate executives calling it a significant impact on their bottom line. This isn't just about whiskey disappearing from Canadian shelves. It's about the real-world consequences of Trump's reckless trade policies coming home to roost. So what exactly happened here? Let's rewind to early March 2025, when Trump decided to impose his signature 25% tariffs on Canadian goods. After U.S. President Donald Trump imposed tariffs on Canadian goods in early March, a number of provinces retaliated, pulling American alcohol from store shelves. This wasn't just some token gesture. Canadian provinces weren't just going to sit back and take it.
It's interesting, Roger, we ask about Canadians or the Canadian government whether there be support for tariffs on imports from U.S. goods coming into Canada, even if the prices go up. And what's clear is that Canadians are much more likely to support rather than oppose tariffs on the imports from the U.S. And, the thing is that, even when we look at whether they think that a deal with the U.S. is worth signing, if it includes some sort of tariffs on Canadian imports, it's much more of a mixed bag. You can see that people are more likely to oppose rather than support. So, the thing is that Canadians are okay with tariffs and paying for the cost, but they are not hot on a deal that could include tariffs on Canadian goods and are worried about the trade-offs on that front.
Polling data showed that Canadians were more likely to support rather than oppose retaliatory tariffs on U.S. imports, even if prices increased. The message was clear: if you want to play tariff games, we can play too. But here's where the story gets even more dramatic. While Trump's tariffs are causing chaos for American businesses, a federal appeals court just dropped a bombshell that could unravel everything.
On this Saturday night, a U.S. court shakes up Trump's trade war. The legal battles ahead after most of America's tariffs are ruled unlawful.
President Trump's tariffs are illegal and unconstitutional.
And the uncertainties and possibilities for Canada's economy. Visas denied for attending the United Nations. How the U.S. is blunting attempts to recognize Palestinian statehood. Plus, who says big box stores can't succeed? An iconic retail brand is making a comeback. And the end of summer is in the air. The sky-high sights and sounds at the Canadian National Exhibition.
Global National. Reporting tonight, Eric Sorensen.
Good evening, and thanks for joining us. U.S. President Donald Trump is vowing to fight back after a federal appeals court ruled his sweeping import tariffs are illegal, saying he exceeded his emergency powers. For now, the duties remain in place as the case heads to the U.S. Supreme Court. But changes could be on the horizon. Mackenzie Gray breaks down what this means for Canada and the future of U.S. trade in tonight's top story.
For the first time since Tuesday, President Donald Trump in public, off to play golf on Labor Day weekend after the centerpiece of his political and economic agenda was dealt a potential major blow.
The bottom line is 7 judges recognized today that President Trump's tariffs are illegal and unconstitutional.
The judges from the Federal Circuit Appeals Court voting in a split decision that Donald Trump's reciprocal and fentanyl tariffs went beyond the authority delegated to the president under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, saying the president required congressional approval to implement them. But there's one catch. The court ruled that the tariffs can stay in place until October 14th to give the Trump administration time to appeal to the Supreme Court, which U.S. Attorney General Pam Bondi confirmed they would do. So, what does this mean for Canada? The 35% tariff on non-free trade goods under the so-called fentanyl tariffs have been deemed illegal by the court. but the 50% tariffs on steel, aluminum, and copper, along with increased duties on softwood lumber, are not affected by this order.
Canadians are kind of lucky because most of our products are protected with the CUSMA rules. So if you can prove that your product that you're sending into the US, you should not be impacted.
Between 85 and 92% of Canadian goods have continued to go to the US duty-free during the trade war, thanks to the CUSMA exemption. But with constant US rule and tariff changes, finding additional markets is imperative.
If you're a small to medium-sized business that's looking at how things are unfolding at this point, it would be a smart thing to start looking for customers in other markets.
While two lower courts have ruled that most of the Trump tariffs are illegal, it's no slam dunk the Supreme Court will agree, Eric, with the Republican majority on the top U.S. court having repeatedly voted to expand the powers of the president.
The court ruled that many of Trump's sweeping import tariffs are illegal and unconstitutional, stating he exceeded his emergency powers. The court found Trump's reciprocal and sentinel tariffs went beyond the authority granted under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act. While the tariffs remain in place temporarily as the case heads to the Supreme Court, this ruling could significantly impact U.S.-Canada trade relations. The impact on Brown-Forman, the parent company behind Jack Daniel's and Woodford Reserve, has been nothing short of devastating. The parent company of American alcohol producers such as Jack Daniel's Whiskey and Woodford Reserve Bourbon says sales to Canada dropped 62% during the latest fiscal quarter compared to a year ago, as American alcohol remains off the shelves in many provinces. Think about that for a moment. A 62% drop. That's not a dip, that's a cliff dive. During their investor call, Brown-Forman's executives couldn't hide their frustration. While we were encouraged by recent discussions, American spirits products have been off the shelf in Canada for months, said Leanne Cunningham, the chief financial officer for Brown-Forman. This had a significant impact on our first quarter of fiscal 2026, which will impact our full fiscal year results. When a CFO is telling investors that your products have been missing from shelves for months, you know this isn't just a temporary blip. But here's where it gets really interesting. The CEO of Brown-Forman, Lawson Whiting, actually went on record saying that Canada's response was worse than the tariffs themselves. That's worse than a tariff because it's literally taking your sales away completely, removing our products on the shelves, Whiting told investors. He called it a very disproportionate response to a 25% tariff. Disproportionate? Really? When you start a trade war, don't be surprised when the other side fights back. The trust deficit between Canada and the United States has become a major factor in this trade war. Canadians view Trump's negotiating strategy as one of constantly asking for more and keeping counterparties off balance, creating lingering doubts about whether any trade deal terms would actually be enforced.
Yeah, these numbers really popped, and it speaks to the environment. You can see that Canadians don't really have a lot of confidence that U.S. President Trump will honor his word, even if a trade deal is signed between Canada and the United States. And what's clear, at least for a lot of Canadians, at least, is they see Donald Trump, and this is part of his negotiating strategy, is to always ask for more, always change things, always keep his opponents or his negotiating counterparty off balance. And that's just part of the way the guy operates. That's why he, love or hate him, he has been a success. He is the president of the United States. But, the thing is that even if a trade deal is signed between Canada and the United States, there will be lingering doubts as to whether the terms of that trade deal will be enforced and whether they're in place.
Okay. Nick, thanks as always. Appreciate talking to you.
Canadians have very little confidence that President Trump will honor his word even if a trade deal is signed between Canada and the United States. This lack of trust makes it nearly impossible to conduct normal business operations when tariff rules and import regulations change almost tweet by tweet from the American president. The scope of Canada's retaliation was comprehensive and coordinated. On March 4th, the Liquor Control Board of Ontario, one of the biggest importers of American alcohol to Canada, representing 3,600 products, said in a statement it ceased the purchase of all U.S. products. We're not talking about a few bottles here and there. This was 3,600 different American products getting the boot from one of Canada's largest alcohol retailers, The financial impact extends far beyond just Jack Daniel's. It's unclear how much the 62% drop in sales translates to in dollars, but the company's total sales were down 3% for the quarter. When you consider that Brown-Forman is a massive company with diverse product lines, having overall sales drop 3% because of one market's boycott shows just how significant Canada was to their business. And it wasn't just Ontario leading the charge. At least 5 other Canadian provinces, Ontario, Nova Scotia, British Columbia, New Brunswick, and Newfoundland and Labrador, have taken similar actions against American alcohol. This was a coordinated nationwide response that showed Canadian unity in the face of Trump's economic bullying. The irony here is that Trump's tariffs were supposed to protect American workers and boost American businesses. Instead, they've directly led to American companies losing sales and potentially laying off workers. The Distilled Spirits Council of the United States wasn't mincing words about the damage. It estimates that 25% tariffs on imports of distilled spirits from Mexico and Canada could lead to a loss of more than 31,000 U.S. jobs. So much for protecting American workers. But here's what makes this story even more fascinating. The timeline reveals that some of the pain American companies are experiencing isn't even directly from the tariffs. Brown-Forman had already announced layoffs before Trump's tariffs went into effect. While the parent company of the Jack Daniel's whiskey brand, Brown-Forman, did indeed lay off workers in early 2025, the reduction in force was announced before Trump's inauguration and before any tariffs went into effect. On January 14, 2025, Brown-Forman announced a series of strategic initiatives for growth that included implementing a workforce reduction affecting approximately 12% of the company's global workforce. The broader alcohol industry has been struggling even without trade wars. Following a pandemic peak in 2020 through 2022, spirit companies have been contending with slowing sales. Brown-Forman first sounded the alarm in 2023 when it reported whiskey sales were falling, a stark contrast compared to a year prior when they were soaring by double-digit percentage points. Trump's trade war just poured gasoline on an already smoldering fire. Now, you might think this story has a simple resolution, but that's where Mark Carney enters the picture. In late August 2025, Canada's Prime Minister made a move that surprised many observers. Canada will remove all tariffs on goods from the United States that are covered by the Canada-US-Mexico Agreement by September 1st, Prime Minister Mark Carney announced on Friday. But here's the key detail. The Prime Minister said Canada will maintain its tariffs on steel, aluminum, and autos as the Liberal government works with the U.S. to craft a new trading relationship between the two countries. This wasn't capitulation. It was strategic repositioning. Canada maintains the best trade deal globally with only 5.5% average tariffs on Canadian goods, crossing the U.S. border compared to 16% globally.
Look, Canadians should understand that we still have the best deal in the world when it comes to trade with the United States. Right now, the average tariff for Canadian goods crossing the border is about 5.5%. Around the world, it's about 16%. Now, some of our industries, steel, aluminum, auto, they're obviously being hit really hard. And the main goal of the negotiations going on right now is, one, to make sure that we preserve our existing advantage and not to make a bad deal, but to secure that existing advantage. And it was good to see over the summer that in executive orders, the United States government also confirmed that that trade under our free trade agreement is protected. And then from that, the complex negotiations that are going on all the time and every day, building towards something more comprehensive and fair. And of course, that will help our industries.
So do I infer from that we essentially capitulated on those other points in order to just maintain what we have? And is that good enough?
Yeah, no, absolutely not. Look, you're negotiating in a long-term negotiation. And what you first want to do is make sure that we preserve our existing advantages. And that's really key. That's going on. The negotiations on the rest of the deal with steel, with aluminum, with auto, that's going on, and it's been really constructive so far. And I think what you're seeing here is, as the Prime Minister said, and someone like me who played hockey.
The minister stressed that Canada won't accept a bad deal and is focused on maintaining competitive advantages while acknowledging the tough economic crisis. There's zero capitulation in Canada's approach, with the country matching U.S. tariffs to level the playing field while keeping negotiations on track. Last week, Prime Minister Mark Carney announced Canada was removing retaliatory tariffs on CUSMA-compliant U.S. goods, which included 25% on American spirits. The alcohol boycott was ending, but Canada kept its leverage on the sectors that really mattered to Trump: steel, aluminum, and automobiles. The reaction to Carney's move was mixed, with critics calling it a climb down. Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre criticized Carney's decision, accusing the Prime Minister of making generous concessions to the U.S. president without getting anything in return. Today we learned that it is yet another capitulation and climb down by Mark Carney. His elbows have mysteriously gone missing, he said Friday. Mike Myers captured the national mood perfectly with his spontaneous elbows-up gesture on Saturday Night Live that became a rallying cry for Canadian patriotism amid Trump's annexation threats. Myers revealed he had no plan to make the gesture, acting purely on anger at the idea of Canada becoming the 51st state. The comedian referenced hockey legend Gordie Howe's playing style as inspiration for the defensive stance, emphasizing it was about telling America to leave us alone, but Carney had a different perspective on what he'd achieved. Consequently, Carney said the effective U.S. tariff rate on Canadian goods was 5.6%, which he described as the best trade deal of any country. From his standpoint, Canada had demonstrated its ability to inflict economic pain, made its point, and then strategically withdrew from a fight that was hurting Canadian consumers, while keeping pressure on the sectors where it could do the most damage to Trump's political coalition. The broader implications of this trade war extend far beyond whiskey sales. Analysts were already warning that other American brands could face similar boycotts. Given the early response we've seen in Canada, we wouldn't be surprised if aggressive U.S. trade policy leads to consumer boycotts on other American brands beyond whiskey, Budweiser, Hershey, Heinz, he told investors. When you start economic fights with your closest trading partners, don't be surprised when the consequences spread beyond your intended targets. What makes the Jack Daniel's story particularly significant is that it demonstrates the real-world impact of Trump's tariff policies on American businesses. In 2024, Canada was the second largest market for U.S. spirit exports, according to the Distilled Spirits Council of the United States. Losing access to your second largest export market isn't just a minor inconvenience. It's a business catastrophe. The bourbon industry in Kentucky, which is heavily Republican territory, felt the pain directly. Bourbon is a $9 billion industry in Kentucky and generates more than 23,000 jobs, according to the state's Distillers Association. When you're hurting a $9 billion industry in a state you need to win elections, you're not just making bad trade policy. You're making bad political strategy. Even Kentucky's Democratic governor wasn't shy about criticizing Trump's approach. Kentucky's Democratic governor, Andy Beshear, has opposed Trump's tariffs and said their impact is going to be incredibly difficult and challenging for our people. When you have bipartisan opposition in your own political strongholds, you know your policy isn't working. The international implications of this trade war extend far beyond North America. Whiting said while Canada only accounts for 1% of Brown-Forman sales, the company is more concerned about the potential impact of broader tariffs in the European Union. The CEO said the Kentucky-based alcohol maker is planning for the possibility of similar retaliatory measures by EU countries. This is the real danger of Trump's approach. It's not just about bilateral trade disputes, it's about setting precedents that could lead to a global trade war. What the Jack Daniel's case study reveals is that boycotts work. Case in point, Canada's boycott of U.S. goods over Trump's tariff tantrums. When consumers and governments coordinate to send a message about unacceptable behavior, businesses feel it in their bottom line immediately. The 62% drop in Canadian sales wasn't spread out over months or years. It happened almost immediately after Canadian provinces pulled American alcohol from their shelves. The response from American industry groups was swift and unambiguous. For decades, there have been zero-for-zero tariffs on spirits trade between the U.S. and Canada. Chris Swanger, president and CEO of the Distilled Spirits Council of the United States, said in a statement this week, "We urge the U.S. and Canada to work together to reach an agreement that continues to foster a thriving spirits industry between our two countries." When your own industry groups are publicly contradicting your trade policy, you know you've lost the business community. The interconnected nature of the North American economy made Trump's tariffs particularly destructive. The North American alcohol industry is interconnected, and tariffs on tequila and Canadian whiskey will harm U.S. companies that have these liquors in their brand portfolios, the association has said. Modern trade relationships aren't zero-sum games where one side wins and the other loses. They're complex ecosystems where disruption in one area creates cascading effects throughout the system. Looking at the broader economic context, this trade war was happening during a period when the alcohol industry was already facing headwinds. In November 2024, CNN reported that alcohol sales in the United States were trending downward. According to the IWSR, a research firm self-described as the leading global drinks data and analytics provider. Overall volumes fell 3% for the first 7 months of 2024, which was more than forecasted, according to a report from drink analysis firm IWSR. All major categories were affected, including tequila, American whiskey, beer, and wine. Adding a trade war to an already struggling industry was like throwing a drowning man an anchor. The Canadian response also revealed something important about modern consumer behavior and government coordination. Canadians are steering away from U.S. goods, sports events, and trips following the recent imposition of tariffs, which have left them stirred, despite the deep ties between the two countries. This wasn't just government policy, it was a grassroots reaction that amplified the official response. What makes Carney's eventual strategic withdrawal even more interesting is that it came after Canada had demonstrated its economic leverage. The alcohol boycott had served its purpose, showing that Canada could inflict real economic pain on American businesses and their workers. Canada had kept its counter tariffs on nearly $30 billion of U.S. goods that fall under the Free Trade Pact, including orange juice and microwaves, despite Trump's CUSMA carve-out. $30 billion in trade is serious leverage. The removal of these tariffs had immediate practical benefits for Canadian consumers. It's orange juice, peanut butter, craft beer, ketchup, coffee pods, refrigerators, washing machines, microwaves, lawn mowers, denim jeans, running shoes, bicycles, lipstick, other cosmetics, toothpaste, paper towels, bed sheets. All of those will at least ease some price pressures on individuals and the businesses in Canada selling them, Campbell said. But notice what stayed on the tariff list: the strategic sectors that really matter to Trump's political coalition. The Jack Daniels story is ultimately a microcosm of what happens when you try to use economic warfare against your closest allies and trading partners. On the call, company chief executive officer Lawson Whiting said the trade dispute has created significant headwinds. While our non-U.S. brands such as Diplomatico and El Jimador continued to deliver growth, they were not able to offset the decline of our brands that are produced in the U.S., he said. American companies found themselves at a competitive disadvantage against non-American brands, exactly the opposite of what Trump's policies were supposed to achieve. The broader lesson here is about the interconnected nature of modern economies and the unintended consequences of populist economic policies. When you start trade wars, you don't get to control how they escalate or where they spread. What began as Trump's attempt to pressure Canada on various issues ended up hurting American workers, American companies, and American consumers while demonstrating Canada's ability to inflict economic pain when pushed too far. As we look toward the future, the Jack Daniels case study serves as a warning about the real costs of economic nationalism. In a globalized economy, trying to bully your trading partners doesn't make you stronger. It makes you isolated, vulnerable, and economically weaker. The 62% drop in Canadian sales isn't just a number on a corporate earnings report. It's a preview of what happens when America abandons the cooperative approach to international trade that made it an economic superpower in the first place. The irony is that Trump's tariffs were supposed to make America great again, but instead they've made American whiskey disappear from Canadian shelves, and American companies beg for relief from their own government's policies. That's not winning. That's what happens when you mistake economic warfare for economic strategy. And as Jack Daniels executives learned the hard way, when you play with fire in international trade, sometimes you're the one who gets burned.